The new coalition has gotten off to a shaky start as it failed to pass the controversial family reunification law after falling short of the majority. And this seems to be a recurring problem with regards to legislation, as yet another bill regarding IDF service for religious women was pulled due to a lack of votes. Here to discuss the ramifications and what this means for future votes is advocate Ziv Maor, legal counsel for the Hallel-Likud Forum and Tirtzu, and Jeremy Saltan, a political strategist and director of English operations of the Yamina party. Welcome. So Jeremy, let's start with you. Amichai Chikli from the Yamina party voted against his own coalition. Prime Minister Bennett saying he was confused, right? And yet this seems to be a recurring problem with legislation being pulled at the last minute due to a lack of majority. I mean, what went wrong? And will the coalition be able to sort of, pull itself together and pass legislation in the future?
Well, you mentioned Amichai Chikli being a member of the coalition. He is not a member of the coalition. He is a member of our party. He chose to vote against the formation of this government. We've had arrangement with him in which he's been allowed to go ahead and vote his conscience as long as he lets us know what he was going to vote before the vote. In this case, so what he had told us was he was going to vote with the coalition. In the end, he chose to vote with the opposition. Because of that, we ended up losing that vote. So that just, explains what happened in that particular case. As in every coalition that has 61 MKs, dating back to Rabin's first term as prime minister in the 1970s, you're going to have situations where on things that are considered, very hot button topics, you will occasionally lose a vote, or you'll have to go ahead and pull a piece of legislation and then bring it back when you're able to go ahead and secure the votes. This is not the first time that we're going through this, and also not in recent history. Back in 2015, the last time that Netanyahu was able to form a normal government, that was a 61 MK coalition, and you had many of these situations happening over the first year. I'm quite confident as this coalition moves along, we will be able to increase the number of members in the coalition from 61 to a larger number, and by doing so, we'll have less of these issues moving forward. The timeline of that is probably going to be after we pass the state budget and everyone understands that we have a clear indication of staying here for at least a couple of good years.
Now, we'll get back to one of your points in a minute, but Ziv, we're talking about the coalition, but the opposition, right, led by the Likud, voted against a law that ultimately they believe in, solely for politics, a law that jeopardizes Israel's security. This is the epitome of putting politics over everything else. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, when you talk about the epitome of putting politics in front of everything else, we must complain about this coalition, but let's discuss whether or not and to what extent is this law designed to protect Israel's security. Now, it is a complicated issue, and it is not the right thing to do to oversimplify it, but I'll try to do it either way. What the law says is that the Minister of Interior, that is Shaked, has full discretion about whether or not a person is entitled for a status of resident in the state of Israel. Now, when this discussion was implied in the early 2000s during the Intifada, the Supreme Court had illegal questions about it. They mentioned that there are certain sorts of considerations that a minister is not allowed to have. Now, a proper minister would have said to the court, so what? The law authorizes me and I practice the law. But the coalition of 2003, which initiated this law in the beginning, submitted itself completely to the court and legislated a law that needs to be legislated every year again and again and again. Now, since 2003 until now, there was no problem with this practice because it was a consensual law. But this coalition, which is formed of mainly leftist elements, does not allow and does not willing to support this act. They have to rely on the opposition. But the reason that the Likud party allowed itself to object to a policy that basically they support is that this specific legislation is not needed. The Minister of Interior, Shaked, presented itself as a right-wing proponent politician, should use its authority within the law. And when there is a candidate that is not suitable, according to her consideration, to become a resident of Israel, she has the right to deny that. There is no need for this legislation. There is no need for the Likud to support it. By proposing this law, She basically acknowledges the fact that the entity that controls here is the court, which is not the legal case.
Okay,
So
I'm gonna stop you there because I want to go back to sort of the bigger picture. Jeremy, we're almost out of time, so I want to hear final thoughts from you and final thoughts from Ziv. I mean, do you think Bennett will be able to get his house in order, so to speak? And what needs to be done now so that you will be able to pass legislation in the future?
I already addressed that in my previous point. I need to really respond to what I just heard here because it's just ridiculous and it's just not true. It's not a piece of legislation. It's a temporary order. It's been around for 18 years. The last 12 years during the Netanyahu government, it has been extended over and over again. There's nothing different between now compared to before. It's a matter of national security. The Shin Bet, not me, not Naftali Bennett, not Ayelet Shaked, the Shin Bet said there was a necessity for this temporary order to be extended, and the Likud decided to put the issue of national security into the category of politicizing it and go ahead and make all of these baseless allegations when they themselves saw the very opinion that was sent by the Shin Bet, and because of that opinion, they spent 12 years in the Netanyahu government extending it time after time. So I'm just very, very upset to see that really the only thing the Likud can do at this point to go ahead and stop from the embarrassment of they themselves being the ones that voted with Ahmed Tibi and with Balad is to go ahead and try to say that it doesn't matter and we didn't need the legislation anyways. Well, again, if we didn't need this temporary order and we didn't need to extend it, then it's very clear that Netanyahu would not have done it the last 12 years.
All right.
And I'm sorry, do not...
Ziv, I want to give you the chance because we're out of time. Ziv, one sentence, final thoughts.
Well, I'd say, as I said in the beginning, this is a complicated issue. It is being oversimplified by both sides. But at the end of the day, yes, I stand behind what I said. Legally, the goal of this legislation can be executed by the Minister of Interior without this legislation. And there are reasons for the Likud, the governments, to do it all along. There are good reasons for the fact that the Likud objects it right now. At the end of the day,
politics.
All right, Jeremy Saltan, advocate Ziv Maor, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
You're welcome.